Welcome to the Rebooting Show. This is a Can edition. We are doing this from the PayPal Ads studio. They have a lovely studio just off the Quaset. Cannot see it, but the C is right there. I'm joined by Cosmin, and Cosmin is the CEO of Supertab. And Cosmin and I have talked over the years about one of my favorite topics, which is micropayments. And one of the things that I always come back to is that, a lot of times in publishing, there's this dichotomy that's artificial between it's either subscriptions or it's ads. And, both have their pluses, but they also have their minuses. And can you just talk a little bit just to open up, with your thinking around, that dichotomy?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. You've been very vocal about micropayments, but also about many other models.
You mean skeptical?
Skeptical over the years, and rightly so. And I enjoy a show. I saw how Doug was on your show talking about
Doug Leeds, yes.
And there was an interesting one as well. And what I like about your show is that you're less concerned about what doesn't really work, but more concerned about and with what works. And so let's talk about some of those items today. Let's maybe start by looking at where the market is today. So over the last 20 months, the world has changed more than over the last 20 years. We literally went from building Lego structures to now building skyscrapers with AI.
Yeah.
And this has given birth to a new player in web ecosystem, and that's AI systems and agents. What they do is they consume crazy amounts of content and data at an unprecedented scale and speed, but they don't watch ads. They don't subscribe, and they don't click. So if that continues, the web as we know it today will die, simply because it cannot afford to have content providers who put out content without being compensated for it.
Yeah.
So if you want, picture content providers as supermarkets and AI agents and AI systems as chefs. Over the last few years, those chefs have been consuming crazy amounts of content, taking everything off the shelves, all the ingredients they needed, but they didn't pay for it for most parts. And now more and more supermarkets are closing doors and only allow you to pass through if you're willing to pay and buy their products. But now it's not just the 5 big LLMs, not just the 5 big chefs. Now we're looking at a billion agents that are coming up, a billion small chefs, and they all want the same content. So what's going to happen is more and more supermarkets close down and only open for those who are willing to pay. And over time, those agents are not going to find any good content anymore, fresh content anymore. And what are they going to do? They're going for the dumpsters.
Yeah.
And you and I will end up with stale bread and last week's salami.
Okay.
Which means if the AI answers back to you and provides an answer, that answer will not be precise anymore. The quality is going to deteriorate and you will not even find it out easily. It's going to hallucinate in a confident way. So that leads to if you want the clear impression here that content providers are way more important than we think today. AI needs great content to stay good.
Yeah.
Now, when you look at what are the models that were traditionally used to monetize content, we had ads, we had subscriptions, and then we had the experiments with micropayments. Ads don't work in AI because there's no real surface to show those to bots, to agents, and to AI companies. They don't consume because the ads were predicated on attention, human attention.
Yeah. Do we know that agents will not be influenced by sponsor content? There are some people who are saying, okay, you got to create a version of your site for agents. And the idea is you can introduce the agents, the sponsor content, and influence, AEO, answer engine optimization, or GEO. I don't think we've decided which one it is.
Well, I think the results or the verdict is still out. I just think that the web was never built for machine consumption at scale. It was built for human attention and human commitment. And we monetize attention with ads traditionally, and we monetize commitment with subscriptions. Assuming that AI ads will not work as properly for agents, you might get redirected somewhere. Your decision might be influenced, but it's not going to happen probably at the same scale as it happened today with humans. Now, for subscriptions don't work properly in AI, because if you want to picture all-you-can-eat restaurant, and then, as an all-you-can-eat restaurant, you can stock up for the weekend because you know how many people are going to approximately show up to your restaurant. And at 11 o'clock when you open up, imagine 10 buses full of hungry basketball players to invade your restaurant, all over your buffet. And when they're done, the next 10 buses arrive. And when those are done, the next one arrived. So we've created with agents and with AI companies a new category of eaters that never stop. And subscription models were never built for those. Models live of, people forget to cancel their subscriptions. People get a lot of value out of that, but actually they never consume more than what they're paying for.
Right. Yeah.
So, and then you have micropayments. And micropayments traditionally were trying to monetize the 97, 98%, 99% of people who never subscribe.
Which is the ultimate flaw of subscription models, right? This was always my problem with Substack, in that the idea that you should only make money off of 3% of your audience, that is the only value that you would realize. I'm like, surely there must be some value that is created for the other 97% you create value and then you extract some of that value. And advertising, sometimes that's the right model, sometimes it's not the model. But with agents, it's totally different. And also, one stat is, Cloudflare has said that we've crossed where bots are now the majority of traffic versus humans. So we already are moving into an internet that is majority non-human.
Yeah, and they expect very simple, fast transactions. They need a specific type of content for a specific purpose. And what they expect to see in the future is, what are the terms, what's the price? And if you agree, then they can get the content, and that's it. They can use the content. So there's a lot. The web itself has changed. So now micropayments are not only getting a second chance. It's almost like micropayments have been early for humans for 20 years.
Yeah.
Now,
well, to be fair, my skepticism, it was always couched with that micropayments are an idea that is inevitable, that it must happen because of the reasons I said. I just said it was always never the right time. After, but maybe I think you make a very compelling case that with agents, it is completely different, because publishers, I believe, let's just say, what were publishers' hesitancies when it came to micropayments for humans?
Mostly cannibalization of the subscription models. Right? If I do this, is this going to eat up some of my subscription revenue? And we were able to actually show for customers that we had 200 customers in Europe and 10-20 in the United States. We were able to show that you increase revenue from subscriptions in average by about 10%. And that's because people they understand the value of your content, and then they commit to something that's more economical for them. So people are not against subscriptions. They are against being pushed into a corner before it's time for it. So we had an interesting experiment with an AI customer where we are powering their entire payment models. And they are reaching 19.7% conversion of people who started using Supertab into subscribers over 4 months. But it takes 3 to 4 months to get them there.
Yeah.
Because people understand the value of the content, and then they're hooked, and then it's easier, more economical for them to jump onto that. So the main reason why publishers pushed back was the fear of cannibalization.
Right. But that doesn't exist. That's what I'm saying. It's it doesn't exist with this emerging agent space. Because you're talking about 1 billion agents, and agents, I feel like even though you walk up and down the Quasset and like I see a little agent, like I mean, a lot of ad tech people are claiming agents. So I don't know. I mean, I might want to check on that exactly. But we're still very early with consumer adoption of agents, right? Because I think one of the questions would be like, how big right now is, the agent market? There's clearly a lot of bots out there. One of the things that we've seen, if you think about like with the big AI providers, or just anyone using AI, like, we've seen like the amount of tokens they're burning through go massively through the roof, like companies, right? And a lot of it to me, maybe it says in America, it reminds me of like how Americans like have like the air conditioning on and the doors open, That's the same way like American businesses, I feel like, have been adopting like AI, and that like now they're starting to figure out like, okay, we've got to route this to the right model. We don't have to use the most expensive thing at the same time. So it's obviously an area that is going to mature. But like, why do you think that? I think the initial reaction to AI was, and this is typical, I feel like publishing, it's always fighting the last war. It was always fighting over the training because it felt wrong. It felt like someone came into the supermarket, took everything off the shelves, and then went and like, opened up an alternative like a restaurant where it's like, no, you don't need to go to the supermarket. You don't need to cook it yourself. We've got all the stuff like here and we've already done it for you. And that feels like moral injury, not to mention financial injury. But that's finished.
Well, I mean, it's like baking bread. The bread has been baked.
Yeah.
And you cannot unbake bread. You cannot say, take the salt out of it for me, please. It's done. So now the next frontier is, and I think it always was the right frontier, it's grounding.
Explain grounding for those who don't.
So grounding is when the LLM reaches out to the web to find new information, accurate information, to inform its answer before it's playing something back to you. So for example, let's start by illustrating how an LLM would work if you just work it locally. So if you download an LLM and run it locally without any access to the web, it can tell you everything about molecular biology. It would tell you everything about how to drink water, change a tire, to all those things. But what it cannot tell you is whether the restaurant next door is open or not. It cannot tell you whether the Knicks have won or lost the game or not, because it doesn't have access to the web, and through the web to the latest information that informs what's right and what's not right. So think of it as a professor who knows everything, and you just lock him up in a cave.
Yeah.
Right? So he knows everything,
but the smartest, but the most clueless, like in some ways.
Right? He has all the information that he needs. He has knowledge, but what he doesn't have is access to reality.
Right.
So grounding provides that access to reality. And if you monetize or aim to monetize at grounding, it means you can charge a very small fee every time when the AI reaches out to you to grab the content that informs its answers.
Yeah. So there's been this idea also that's been popular of, okay, we need to establish leverage. In any negotiation, you need leverage. Last year here at Cannes, I did a podcast with Neil Vogel, CEO of People Inc., and Neil was saying, it's very simple. We got to like create leverage. And that was like basically saying, we're going to block the bots. Okay. And it was like the underpants. No, it was like step one, block the bots. Step three is profit. Step two is giant question mark. These AI engines have they've done a few deals. They've done some deals. Like Google will not separate its crawler, but OpenAI has cut a few deals. This always seemed to me to be more almost like PR in some ways, because obviously these engines, first of all, it's going to be, when you're talking about 1 billion agents, we're not just talking about like a couple of like, massive frontier labs. We're talking about just a giant ecosystem, right? So you're never going to be able to cut all these deals. How is anyone going to be able to cut these deals, right?
So let's take this one step back. What we are seeing in the market right now are a lot of lawsuits and a lot of anger, which are all justified actions. And then you see those coalitions between publishers, where they're like the Spur coalition and others, where they're bringing together publishers who are trying to orchestrate their demands with one voice and get leverage, because you spoke about leverage. Now, leverage is not a business model. So I believe when you
It's a good episode title right there.
she's so when you think about those losses that are happening, is what they have achieved is they have gotten AI to the table. But being at the table and winning at the table are two separate things.
Yeah.
So what I think is happening is they're trying to extract money out of AI companies. I think extracting money out of meaningful revenues out of those AI companies is probably going to be very difficult on a structural level. Let me talk you through this by the numbers. AI right now optimizes for two things: distribution and unit economics. They want everyone to use their systems, and they need to make sure that the cost of what they are servicing doesn't exceed its value. Because if that happens, their business model is dead in the waters. If you do the math, if you look at OpenAI's numbers, which they published a few days ago, $34 billion in cost for 2025. They had a $30 billion accounting charge. They had 13 billion in revenue, and they ended the year with burning through 8 billion of cash. It's very difficult to extract a meaningful check out of someone who's burning through $8 billion. And what you're going to achieve is that they're going to fight it. They're going to substitute your content, and they are going to try to find ways around your content. So the question is, how do you change this? How do you make...
There's whitelist and blacklist approaches that people are trying.
Well, you want to become part of their... You want to become aligned in their revenue.
Right.
Not aligned in their...
Yeah,
in their
I mean, the
cost
ideal is there's a line for compute, and there's a line for, they'll probably call it data or something like this, but I know the rest of us call it content or journals.
Yeah, and if you just continue by the numbers, just imagine we get all those lawsuits settled. What could be an amount that could make sense? Is it $1 billion? It could be, $2 billion. Let's say, if you take 10,000 newsrooms and now divide those 2 billion by 10,000 newsrooms, you end up with $200,000 per newsroom. That's not, and that this is a one-time check. This is not really enough. So the shift that needs to happen and will happen, probably, this is what I believe, is going to be the switch be from being a cost-generating event to being a revenue-generating event.
Yeah.
To be part of their revenue stack, as you said, you have a line item for publisher costs, and you monetize the grounding. Every time the AI needs your content, they pay you a very small fee.
Yeah.
That compounds over time. And their revenue grow, your revenue grows.
Well, I think that's the important. It's inevitably, for this to be sustainable and long-term, you're going to have to be business partners. You're just going to have to cut a deal. Too bad, so sad about the, what went on with how these models were built. That is finished. You cannot put the toothpaste back in the tube. Choose your cliche. But in order to be business partners, you have to align your interests, right? And honestly, I go back to the ad-based internet with Google and all the distribution challenges that were going on right now. Now, broadly, the interests were aligned. Google wanted to send traffic because they monetized that traffic, by the way, with its ad tech. This was not they weren't running a charity with it being they might have said that publicly, that was not the case. But then their interests sort of didn't, and we're seeing this, the interests of publishers and I'll pin on Google, but and Google have, they've broken apart a little bit, and that is a reality. So I think so how do you align those interests, I guess?
Well, I think first you need to understand that you can't tax an input into being valuable. But if you make it easy enough for both partners to license from one another, then you have a business model there. So you need an economic model and you need the rails. You need both. The technology, the rails need to be available, and the economic model that supports those rails needs to be available as well. But let me go back because you mentioned Google, and Google is actually pretty interesting because they are setting the precedent for a model that has worked in the past, and that's very related to what I'm suggesting now, which is YouTube.
Yeah.
Remember when YouTube in 2007 said we are going to share revenue with publishers and we invite publishers to be part of YouTube. Publishers didn't like it because they feared cannibalization.
The typical analog dollars for digital pennies.
But then what happened is Google or YouTube changed the dynamics of the game by inviting publishers to participate in it. So they got attribution, they got all the analytics, they got revenue share. And in the next 3 years or so, not much happened. So revenues were very modest in the first 3 years. They were small in the next 3 years. And then they started to really grow into what is today a $22 billion payout market to publishers.
Right.
So YouTube has set the precedent that it works if you have content providers as a line in your revenue model.
So talk me through now how this will be done, like how these rails will be set, because there are, as I mentioned, Cloudflare. There's people at the CDN level who say that they're going to, intercept, and then I think in the underpants gnome sort of thing, the step 2 is sort of unclear where the marketplace, where the transactions are going to take place, because there isn't, as far as I can tell, a lot of transactions taking place. Like whether it's through Cloudflare, whether it's through Tobit, like it doesn't seem like there's a ton of transactions taking place.
No, I think the market is right now in the phase of creating the ecosystem. So you have a variety of players that now show up and they all take parts of this ecosystem. And when I mean rails is, what I mean is you need a technical and technological infrastructure for content providers to sell access to rights-cleared content in a very simple way to AI companies, but also to agents, which means automation. You cannot have a human in the middle when you're discussing, when you're selling content to agents. And then on the other side, you need also protocols in the infrastructure for AI companies to be able to play back information to the content provider. Mm-hmm. So all those things are happening right now. You have the RSL protocol, really simple licensing, which enables you to claim your rights, to assert your rights, and tell the AI what is it able to do with your content or not. So do you allow grounding? Do you allow caching? Do you allow training? What do you allow the AI to do with your content? And I'll talk about that in a second. Then you have protocols which enable the AI to express its intent. What does it plan to do with your content? And that's the COMP protocol provided by IAB. And then you have those new protocols that are now being pushed into the market by the Spur coalition, like the content telemetry standard, which enables the AI to tell the content provider what it has done with the content. So now you have a whole loop that is a transactional unit that facilitates a transactional unit right there.
Okay.
So that's one level, the standards that enable the information to travel between parties so that everybody's informed about what's important. Then secondly, you need the right gates to open and close access to those who pay or don't pay. I mentioned before the supermarkets. Like what we're building is the door to the supermarket. And then you need models that enable you to run those transactions and to settle those transactions. So you have multiple layers where you have multiple players coming up and providing individual parts of those layers. And the part that we do with Supertab Connect is, this is a part of what we call the economic infrastructure for AI companies and agents. What I mean by that is we take every transaction, we take every agent task, every token exchange, every content request. We meter, price, aggregate and settle that.
Okay.
So when I go one level deeper, the very first step, and maybe to make this very vivid for publishers, what would the publisher do the first day when they sign up with someone like Supertab Connect? First, they have to assert their rights. What do I allow the AI to do with my content? Can it ground it? Can it cache it? Can it quote parts of my content? What is it? What it can do with it? Then that gets baked into a file, and that file gets published on the web. So when the AI hits your site, and that could be a big LLM just as well as an agent, they right away see what do you allow with your content to happen. That's your licensing file. Then secondly, you can set a price. And we are right now experimenting with, this is at a experimental level, what's the right price to charge for your content? Because no one knows right now. So we're training the models quite a bit of information to suggest to you based on the quality of your content, the nature of your content, how up-to-date is your content, what could you charge for the variety types of usage to the LLMs. Mm-hmm. Then you need to meter, because if you cannot meter, you cannot control anything. So you need to meter every single access that happens to your site after you published your license. Which types of bots? Are they on the white list, on the black list? Which types of bots and agents are coming to your site? And you need to visualize those by access, by number of requests, by URL, by a variety of factors which provide intelligence back to the content provider. It makes visible to them what happens with their content. Then you would have to aggregate different billable events into one invoice, which is the power of micropayments, because you cannot process like a 10-cent transaction. It doesn't make any sense.
Right.
So you need to aggregate and then settle that either end of the week, end of the month, or whenever a specific amount has been reached. All those things we are providing with Supertab Connect. That's our part, if you want, of the rail that we are providing. And this rail enables content providers to sell rights-cleared content to AI companies, to LLMs.
Yeah. So it seems like the framework is less licensing exactly, and it's more metering.
It's a combination of both. You need the licensing,
the
permissioning, and the permissioning will be hypercritical when agents are coming to your site.
I guess what I mean is like, in in the deals that go back to your metaphor, like, it's been all you can eat. It's like, okay, Axel Springer cuts a deal with OpenAI, and OpenAI is going to feast, and it's like the old Pizza Hut buffet.
Well,
like,
if I can interrupt for a second, right there, this is one of the downsides of making this kind of one-off deals, this bulk licensing deals. What they do is they actually provide an information asymmetry. AI knows everything that happens with your content. You know nothing. You might guess what's happening to your content and with your content. But the second, when you have consumption-based models and metering, you have aligned interest. You see exactly who is consuming how much content for which purpose, which also informs your content creation, which is important for you. I need to know which kind of content is being used the most for which purpose. I can create more of that.
Yeah.
So those big deals actually are not very favorable. What you're doing is you're capping the upside on day one.
Right. But you're protecting the downside. I think one of the things that's tricky is like, how is the price, like what is the price discovery mechanism? Because I'm pretty sure publishers are going to think that the price should be like this, and that the agents are going to say, it's more like down here.
That's definitely an itchy topic. This is where I spend quite a bit of time on right now, trying to visualize pricing for both sides. Why a publisher should not charge too much for the content, and why also the AI should not offer too little for the content. And that's why I called it in our chat also. It's in beta or even in alpha right now, because there's a lot of work that needs to go into that. Both sides will need to see that the price is either too high, too low, and they need to find the right middle. And what's going to happen is if you offer your price for your content at a price that's too high, bots, agents, AI systems are not going to buy it. So you're going to get first-hand feedback. Over time, when you lower the price and you find the right middle together, you're going to see consumption go up. So the market, and I have no doubt about that, will regulate itself. This is the beauty of a fully autonomous market compared to, let's say, the pre-AI era, where humans have set the price.
Right.
When you think about, on a higher level, you had supply and demand with publishing and their subscription models, where supply, meaning publishers, offered to their audience only subscription models, mostly. And you had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5% of people ever subscribing to their products. So 95+% of people never subscribe to their products, which means the demand side of the market showed you a signal which you have ignored for whatever reasons. Now with AI, you cannot ignore that anymore. If you miss the price finding, you miss that middle, there will be no business. Agents are going to simply bump into your content and just walk away, try to find it somewhere else cheaper. So I have big hopes that the market is going to regulate itself by pricing.
So some of this like conversation reminds me of like the early days of programmatic. And I started covering programmatic really when it started, it was ad networks.
I remember that.
And it all made sense, right? It's, you could only work with a certain number of advertisers, and you weren't able to serve this like massive amount of, presumed demand because you were doing it through human processing, etc. And then in order to do that, there ended up being like a gigantic number of intermediaries, many of which are here in Canada, in a harbor nearby, although they're mostly about CTV and retelling, because they ended up, at least in the publisher's view, extracting more value out of the transaction. Now they said, look, we're the one who overlaid data and stuff like this. How do you see this market developing where it doesn't like repeat the same kind of dynamics that publishers kind of felt like a little bit burned by, and that they felt like intermediaries were taking more value than they were creating?
Well, there is a certain challenge that we need to be aware of, which is as an agent, if you charge an agent too much, you are going to break their unit economics. So they will simply not be able to buy and then use or resell that type of content. Mm-hmm. So in this case, it is a bottom-up approach where you need to learn at which price are agents willing to buy, and who is behind an agent? Well, it's a human. So if the human is willing to spend 10 cents on a piece of information, then that's the price signal that you start to have right there. And so it's human influence, because the human is going to tell the agent what it is able to spend for which type of content. And then it's also going to be distributed across a variety of sources, because an agent doesn't just query one simple source. They're going to 3, 4, 5, 20. So you will have to set the price as the owner of the agent. That will get translated down to what the agent is able to spend on publisher content. But the other way around as well. The publisher will be able to set price and say and state their expectations. And then if the agent matches those expectations, then there's a deal, like the matchmaking. And it will happen much faster than it happened in programmatic. And what you see here is the democratization of the market, because we are talking about the 1 billion and 5 big LLMs on the buy side, and 1 billion agents on a buy side as well.
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, it is like it's a scale thing, right? So, I mean, because we were talking about fractions of fractions, you're starting to say, well, I mean, is this going to amount to like all that much of the revenue pie, particularly if others are taking little fees in between, in order to enable that, which obviously, they should, because they're adding value to the transaction. I think most like programmatic providers were providing value, but I would always hear from publishers that they were taking too much, they were extracting too much value for the transaction.
Well, that's exactly right. Which is why I think the power of like micropayments and microtransactions is now coming back. I'm convinced that 90+% of all grounding transactions will happen between the penny and the dollar. And many of them will also happen sub penny, sub 1 cent value.
Right.
But they compound because this agent, when you think about ChatGPT, when you ask a question and get an answer back, that costs the agent, or that costs you about like 5,000 tokens. But when you're talking about an agentic workflow, you're looking at up to 1 million tokens. And that's because the agent needs to understand what you want, branch out to the web, find the information, process that information for you, reason whether it's a right result, do it again if needed, and then present the end result to you. So now you're grounding a variety of sources. And yes, this is going to cost a little bit of money, but the results are so much better. Just think about how you're using those AI tools today and the value that you're extracting out of them. So what I've seen at the micropayments times is that people see value in the content that they're purchasing. So people will see value in the results that agents are providing, and they're going to pay for those agents to get access to the right information. Yeah. Otherwise, you're buying stale bread and last week's salami.
Yeah. So do you expect this to be more than an incremental revenue stream? One of the unclear things for me is if this, look, publishers always lead that like incremental. They never, it's called incremental for a reason. Like it means like it's just a little increment.
100%.
They've got a hole.
I'm always glass half full.
Okay.
But I expect this to be like both.
I don't know. You might be.
I'm positive. But I expect this to really be more than just incremental revenue. I expect this to be like a third monetization model for the AI web. When you just think about what I mentioned before with YouTube, we have precedents out there for like a meaningful big revenue model. And I think AI is preparing for their YouTube moment. And publishers need to be ready. You are looking at 1.5 billion customers. So publishers are now not just looking at a few people who are trying to buy content and bumping their paywall and then not subscribe. You are looking at a democratized market where agents can buy at scale very fast for small amounts. And that's what compounds. Because when you wake up in the morning and you ask your agent a question, what's going on in the world, you don't want the answer to be the Knicks won. You want the answer to be they were 29 points behind. They turned the game in 1.5 seconds before it finished. And Madison Square Garden erupted. And people were dancing in the streets, and there was incredible joy because no one saw this coming. And then you go in and you might be willing to spend a little bit more money to get more results or, dive deeper into the content. But you want quality results from your agent.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned the YouTube example, but that took time, right? Like, because I think sometimes publishers think, they want immediate revenue. And I get it, like, because there's a lot of pressures on them. But this seems like it's going to take some time to develop this market.
To be very Swiss there, I don't think that publishers can expect meaningful revenue on a broader scale in the next 12 to 24 months. Simply because right now the ecosystem is being built. The market is being built. And those things take time to develop, especially when you think about Rails. But the beauty of this is once you have Rails in place and you bring in automated processes, once they start scaling, they scale pretty big. So when I'm saying that AI is getting ready for the YouTube moment and publishers need to get ready, what I mean is that publishers need to have infrastructure in place and there needs to be an economic model that makes sense. And then the consumption-based model, in my opinion, is the one model that I believe will happen. Then you want to be ready. So what I cannot promise publishers is fast revenues. There are companies out there who I think are doing that and did that, And what they reached is they disappointed publishers
Yeah.
because obvious reasons. But what I can promise is readiness and the infrastructure and the economic model. So you need to be ready when the market starts to pick up. And you also want to be able to influence what's happening on your content, with your content. You want to be part of those conversations. You don't want to sit on the sideline and wait until someone else is entirely out of your control, building everything for you. Then you're going to be late to the game.
Yeah.
But
So-
what you're going to do is you're going to learn incredibly much about what's going on in the market, who is using your content, how people are using, and agents and LLMs are using your content. And this intelligence you can then turn into better content, better products, better offerings, better pricing.
Right. So final thing is just to summarize all this. What are 3 things that you would say that publishers should do to be like ready for this agentic world? Because it seems it's very clear that we're moving into an agentic framework, right? And the timing, I would expect it to go pretty quickly, at least when you look at like the numbers out there. But what are 3 things you think the publishers should do like right now?
One of them is use Supertab Connect to learn. Get insights into what's working, declare your rights. Like you need to assert your rights so that AI already knows what you're allowed to happen with your content and whatnot. Number 1. Number 2, to get this insights and intelligence that puts you in a position to either determine pricing or the right content to provide and the right models to offer to AI companies and to agents. And then you will want to also be prepared for the 1.5 billion customers. It's not just the big deals. You can continue to argue with them and try to find bigger licensing deals if you feel like it, but start having water flowing through your pipes at small scale, understand exactly what's happening, and also bring in your existing licensing deals. You might find that the next deal, when you're up for extending your licensing deal with an LLM, you might find that it's better to have a consumption-based deal, and you want to bring that in and measure everything that happens. So right now I think we're in a phase 1 of monetizing intelligence. You need to get the intelligence first. Then you need the rails to monetize it, and then you scale.
Excellent. Cosmin, thank you so much.
Thank you.